Hello. As world leaders and activists begin to gather for this year's United Nations Conference of Parties, the annual climate meeting known as COP, the enormity of what is at stake is quite striking. Scientists now predict that this year will be the hottest year ever measured with instruments. We've seen climate disasters unfold in every single part of the world, and yet progress in reducing the greenhouse gas pollution that's causing this crisis continues to fall woefully short. It's clear that world leaders need to immediately commit to a path to true net zero emissions. Unfortunately, this year's COP president is the CEO of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, one of the world's biggest and by many measurements least responsible oil companies. He's a nice and intelligent man, but he has a direct conflict of interest, and his interests are similar to the large fossil fuel companies around the world. And for years, the fossil fuel industry's presence at these important meetings has been growing dramatically. Their objective has not been to help achieve success in reducing the use of the fossil fuels they're selling. Their objective has been to block real action within the COP process and to block anything that would reduce the sales of their products. But this year, the absurdity has come to a head. After all, the climate crisis is principally a fossil fuel crisis. We can no longer allow this process to be so dominated by the very companies that profit from perpetuating it. That's why at this year's COP, our first objective must be to do everything we can to overcome the influence of the fossil fuel industry and build a consensus around a global commitment to phase out fossil fuels. We need to reduce greenhouse gas pollution as quickly as possible, and that starts with commitments to move away from coal, oil, and gas. Too often, the large petrostates are able to block the ambitious outcomes that are actually supported by a very large majority of all nations around the world. They rely on the requirement for a consensus, in effect unanimity, in order to gain the power to veto any truly ambitious outcome. And that's why now is the time to begin advocating for fundamental reform of the COP process so that the fossil fuel industry does not retain de facto control over the scale and scope of global climate action that the rest of the world supports. Half measures favored by the fossil fuel industry really do not help us in achieving true net zero. They slow us down. And we can't bet our future on unproven and barely developing technologies that give the industry a kind of license to keep on burning more and more of their dirty fuels. Sometimes I wonder if they take us for fools. And we cannot either continue subsidizing fossil fuels with taxpayer money. Last year, fossil fuel subsidies reached their highest level ever, more than $1 trillion. Instead of subsidizing the destruction of human civilization's future, we must invest in the sunrise industries, the new industries that are already beginning to produce the basis for a clean energy future. And the optimism is growing that they can do this. We also need to ensure that our transition to a clean energy future is a just transition. And that means the wealthy nations that have historically been the largest source of greenhouse gas pollution must finally and fully deliver access to the climate finance that's so desperately needed by those nations that are hit hardest by the impacts of the climate crisis, but have the least ability at present to defend themselves, to adapt, and to finance the transition that they need and that the world needs. That means making sure that nations across the global south get access to the fair credit and financing that they need to build clean energy economies. And it means mobilizing the private sector to invest in clean energy solutions all around the world at scale. This is the only way to build a safe, stable, and prosperous future where together we actually do reach true net zero. We can do it. So as we head into these critical negotiations, so much is at stake. But we know what we have to do, and we have the tools and the technology and the proven deployment models to do it. Clean energy is fast becoming the cheapest form of electricity in the history of the world. It already is in many places, and it's fast becoming the cheapest everywhere in the world. And experts predict that transitioning to renewable forms of energy will actually save trillions of dollars and make the environment cleaner and improve human health and create many more jobs. So my hope is that working together, we can make COP28 a turning point in our efforts to solve the climate crisis. The Climate Reality Project and our climate reality leaders will be on the ground at COP28 working toward these key objectives: reducing emissions, including an agreement to phase out all fossil fuels and fossil fuel subsidies. This also means tripling renewables, doubling progress on energy efficiency, and getting methane emissions from the fossil fuel industry operations down to near zero by 2030. It means increasing climate finance so that developing nations can address the crisis and finance the rebuilding and modernization to a clean energy economy that it requires. It means reforming future COP processes to ensure that fossil fuel interests are not any longer able to block progress for all of the world. And because this work is critical to everyone around the world, we'll be bringing you to COP28 with us for an event on December 7th that we're calling 24 Hours of Reality on the ground at COP28. We'll be capturing the conversations, events, and action behind the scenes in Dubai as we work to reject the fossil fuel agenda and compel world leaders to finally place us on a path to true net zero. I hope you'll join the Climate Reality Project on December 7 to watch 24 Hours of Reality on the ground at COP28. Go to 24hoursofreality.org in order to sign up for updates and to view this content. Together we can and we will solve the climate crisis.